So hello, everyone. Thank you for your patience. Dr. Tania Aparicio Morales will be joining us during the session, but we are ready to go and jump right ahead into this conversation about Afro-Peruvian culture. And good afternoon and welcome to this second panel of the Multicultural Music Group Afro-Latin America Research Focus Group. I'm Wilfredo Jose Burgos Matos, Community Outreach Coordinator for the Multicultural Music Group. We are a Bronx nonprofit devoted to teaching history through music. Today, we are joined by students from across New York City's universities who are interested in learning more about Afro-descendants and African heritage in Peru. And there we have Tania. Yay, thank you. Thank you everyone for being a part of this project, and know to all the students participating that we do this educational work, this educational component for you. So that you know a little bit about what we do, the multicultural functions through the concept of playing history. So we commission renowned artists from the regions we study to compose original pieces for the multicultural music encounters. And those are the final celebration events that kind of like celebrate the culmination of an entire year's programming. And this year that will be taking place at Lehman College on June 9th and 16th. On June 9, we will have the Afro-Peruvian concert. Composers get inspired by specialists in the field and their research. And today you'll see that conversation between scholars and composers happening in real time. In other words, we strive to understand the socio-historical foundations of the theme for the year, which in this case is Afro-Latin America, and we commission artists to compose pieces about it. That way, we play history and look forward to enriching the communities that we serve by sharing this symbiotic process between scholarship and composition. Without further ado, I will be introducing you to our panelists and then jump right into the questions. First, we have Mónica Zegarra, who is an Afro-Peruvian writer, performer, and human rights advocate, founder and former director of LUNDU, Center for Afro-Peruvian Studies and Advancement. In the artistic world, Carrillo goes by the name Oru. She creates poetry that mixes Afrobeat, hip-hop, and Afro-Peruvian music to bring attention to the ongoing effects of racism and sexism. Her productions Unicroma and Poetics of Reparation included a CD, a book, and a live performance with musicians and dancers. As a songwriter and performer, she has been featured in the Grammy, Latin Grammy, and Independent Music Awards winner album El Orilla de la Rosa. She holds an MFA in Performance Media and Interactive Arts from Brooklyn College, a bachelor's degree in journalism from the National University of San Marcos, Peru, a master's degree in political journalism and cultural analysis from the University of Antonio Ruiz Montoya, and a specialization in international law and in human rights from Oxford University in England. Then we will hear from Dr. Tania Aparicio Morales, who is an interdisciplinary sociologist, art practitioner, and video maker. As a qualitative sociologist, she studies the production of art and culture and how different forms of inequality are experienced in organizational settings, with particular attention to class, gender, and ethno-racial relations. She has focused on the dynamics of art organizations to demonstrate how, by whom, and under what conditions art and culture are produced in the Americas. With her research, she seeks to understand and address inequality in cultural and artistic life by illuminating the subtle and explicit ways in which these systemic hierarchies are enacted in the art world. Aparicio Morales holds a PhD in sociology from the New School for Social Research in New York and currently serves as lecturer in the Arts Administration program at Columbia University's Teachers College. And last but not least, our very own composer for this cycle on Afro-Peru, Afro-Peru, not Afro-Peru, Yuri Martin Juarez Illescas, who is a guitarist, arranger, and composer who began his career in 1996 as a guitarist for various groups of Afro-Peruvian music, folk, and fusion. His musical training ranges from formal studies at New York University with Jill Goldstein, John Scofield, and Peter Bernstein, and also with the Peruvian masters of the guitar, such as Pepe Torres, Álvaro Lagos, Jorge Madueño, and more street experience in Afro-Peruvian peñas. He has shared the stage and recorded with musicians of the stature of Susana Vaca and other iconic Peruvian composers such as Kiri Escobar and Javier Lasso, and trailblazing bands, including the Gabriela Alegría Afro-Peruvian Sextet, Nova Lima, and Tangolandó, among others. In December of 2009, he moved to New York City and gets the Latin Jazz Corners Award in the categories of Best Afro-Peruvian Jazz Album and Best Latin Jazz Guitarist Debut for his album Afro-Peruano. And to those of you who were here at 4, you were listening to part of that album. In 2012, he released Tangolando with the Argentinian singer Sofia Tosello. Tangolando is the first encounter of traditional Argentine tangos with Afro-Peruvian rhythms. This album was nominated for the Independent Music Awards in 2013. And it is amazing that yesterday we were having a conversation about Afro-Argentina, and today we continue with Afro-Peru. So everything is kind of a full circle. So thank you very much to all our panelists and to all the attendees. We will start with questions about the historical background of Afro-Peruvian people. And first, Mónica, could you please share 3 major aspects of the history of Afro-descendants in Peru, and why are those aspects relevant to understanding Afro-Peruvian culture?
Sure. My pleasure to be here, and I am honored to share this space with you, with Yuri, with Tania. I would like to share 2 or 3 key issues. First, it's important to understand the difference between the Atlantic and the Pacific experience. We, as Afro-Peruvians, we are located in the Pacific coast. So why is important? Because the Africans arrived to the slave markets located in the Atlantic, like Cartagena, Bahia, Montevideo. So Black culture in the Atlantic has more direct traces from Africa. We can maybe identify that Santeria or Regla de Fá is Yoruba, Capoeira is Congo, Angola. But in order to go to the Pacific, we have a second trip. So we were mixed in the markets and we traveled to the Pacific area. So I think that is important. Because of that reason, we lost our connection or our direct connection with Africa, specifically the language and the religion. The second is related to the geography. In the Americas, especially in South America, we have the Andes and the Amazon as 2 main barriers that really don't allow us to cross from the Atlantic to the Pacific. Because of that reason, Black people in Peru, in Chile, in Bolivia, we were located back then in the coast. But that coast is a desert. We don't have the jungles or the Amazon like Afro-Ecuadorians, Afro-Colombians, and Afro-Brazilians. So that geography impacted a lot because we were not able to create successful palenques or quilombos, which are the maroon communities. Back then, when we escaped in the coast, many of the Black people, for example, in the Peruvian area, they ended up like bandoleros, like just living as Robin Hood or Peter in the roads, no, because they were not able to maintain Acrea communities like happened in Salvador de Bahia in Brazil or in Esmeraldas in Ecuador. Or so And there is another three, no reason, but important fact, that is the political concept of Afro descendants. No, we call it ourselves Black, Negro, Negros, but in 2001 was the first time in the history that the concept of Afro descendants, or people of African descendants, was included officially in the United Nations. And because of that, we have a body of international laws of human rights that has impacted our really modern trajectory. For example, because of that inclusion, in Brazil was founded the Ministry para la Igualdad Racial, which is responsible for the affirmative actions to include Afro-Brazilians in the public universities. No, because of we have this inclusion in 2001. In the case of Peru, Chile, Panama, and Argentina, the Black question, or the ethnicity question to identify Black people, was included in the census. So this is why it's important, if we want to understand the modern trajectory of Black people, specifically what happened in Peru, in Bolivia, in Ecuador, that we were really less advanced than in the US. No, we always need to go back to 2001 and understand that that day, that year, September of 2001, was fundamental for our advancement and all the things that we are doing right now.
Thank you very much for that. So there's definitely a lot of complex, themes, facts, and historical turns that we must understand in order to kind of grasp really how is it that there is an Afro-Peruvian culture and how it has remained. And to go deeper into that history, we're gonna continue kind of like expanding on it as we continue the conversation. But Mónica, I'd like to know, what was the role of Afro-descendants in the liberation processes and independent movements of the region, not only in Peru, but also, the regions that are bordering Peru?
Yeah, the independence from Spaniards, was in Peru was officially in 1821. But it's important to remember that Black people or Africans, we didn't get the freedom in that year. We wait 33 years more. Was in 1854. So why this is important to say? Because Simón Bolívar, especially Don José de San Martín, they promised, the emancipation to Black people. This is why Africans joined the war. But in the year when these people or these leaders declared the independence, they say, "Oh, I'm sorry, it's just for the bellies." So everybody who will be born after today. But that was something very bad, because many Black people from Chile, from Argentina, and from Peru, they joined a group called the Batallón Numancia. So this is why there are many stories about what happened with Afro-Uruguayans, Afro-Argentinians, or Afro-Chileans. Is because many of them, they really left their areas to join different battles, including this specifically time. No, and the other thing that I would like to say is, like, when we talk about liberation in the US, for example, I think we have a different connotation of liberation in Latin America. No, if someone asks me about liberation, I know that here in the US people connect with the, for example, massive incarceration, this extension of the slavery that now is people working as slaves in the jails. No, but for us, or for me, liberation is more connected to the maroon experience, to the quilombos, to the palenques, no? Because we really, until now, there are many communities that they are living under the structure of a quilombo, of a palenque. They call themselves palenques, they call themselves quilombos, and they are fighting for that recognition, no? I just want not just to talk about Peru, but for example, in Brazil, there are 6,000 communities that they recognize themselves as quilombos. The government recognized the existence of 4,000, but gave a collective title to 400. So we are talking just in Brazil about 1.3 million people that they recognize themselves as quilombos, which is like the maroon communities, no? In Peru, we don't have that experience of situation, but something important about Peru is that Black people, we were able to get the land because we have an agrarian reform. So just to end, if you want to understand Latin America and what is going on, you will see that one of the most important issues for Black people, because many of us, we are rural, is to maintain our lands, no? Because now we are suffering a lot of depredation and expropriation. But for people in the coast, in the Peruvian coast, it's not the same agenda because we own our land, because we have an agrarian reform. And we were fighting a lot for that process. So I don't want to extend that topic too much, but I think the agrarian reform in the coast of Peru is a key issue to understand why we are really different than Afro-Equatorians or Afro-Brazilians.
Thank you very much for that. And yeah, definitely you mentioned something very important, like the need for recognition. And also that takes me, that kind of takes me to the fact that there are many forms of erasure and silences that the state itself has enacted, that many entities in Peru and in Latin America have enacted as well. And I'd like to hear from Tania about that. What is the role of these cultural enterprises, these cultural institutions, these arts institutions in the erasure of Afro-Peruvians?
Could you maybe be specific about which organizations are you thinking about?
I'm thinking, museums and also like cultural institutes and Ministry of Culture in Peru. Like what is the role of them in that?
Yeah. So I guess those are definitely different questions, but what I do see that it's connected, it's just the post-colonial process after independence and the building of the nation state in Peru has always been very influenced by an idea of whiteness, or whitening our institutions, our organizations, including the art and cultural organizations. So there was always this sort of, which I think also happens in the US and in other parts of the world, that are experiencing, that went through processes of settler colonialism, in which these organizations there's on the one hand the hegemonic art organizations, the art museums where European art is shown, and then there's these other museums where perhaps anthropological or other forms of art are seen as products of the past. So first, there's this segregation of art and cultural production that it's ruled by these more settler colonial logics and the supremacy of a European aesthetic. So in that way, it's separating them, therefore subordinating any other racial cultural creation to the lens of the colonizer. So that's on the one hand, there's this, but then because these organizations receive funds, then there is the way in which some organizations receive more funds than others. So there's also a complete neglect of cultural production from, for instance, Afro-Peruvian or indigenous communities that don't really get the same resources to present their work as work of the present, not just work of the past, because in many cases, the work of the cultural production of indigenous and Afro-Peruvians are also connected to things that happened in the past and framed as valuable because they were put us in the past in this particular kinds of cultural organizations. And then at the same time, there has been moments like glimpses, and I'm sure Mónica also is familiar with these like moments, like blinks of time where institutions like the Ministry of Culture has assigned offices of Afro-Peruvian rights, Afro-Peruvian culture, to revisit racism and to talk about racism in the arts and culture and the society more broadly. But those have been historically pre-exceptional. So there's at the hands of the state that it's very rooted in a settler colonial logic of valuing European cultural production much more than anything else, or artists who align with that logic and aesthetic. And so there is a complete lack of resources and recognition of these other groups of artists and cultural producers who are making work now, not only in the past.
Thank you for that. And now, to kind of like problematize it a little bit more, I'm gonna go with you, Yuri, in a while, but I'm gonna switch the order in which I imagine the questions to go. But then when there is some sort of recognition of marginalized communities, Peru tends to be presented, of being primarily of indigenous descent, and that is pretty much sometimes one of the biggest sources of pride of the nation. And that kind of like shows, like there are different ways of claiming a national identity in Latin America. And in the case of Peru, indigeneity tends to be a little bit more centered. So my question would be like, what happens to other, marginalized communities and to Blackness specifically when indigeneity is centered? And in the same vein, Mónica, like what happens to indigeneity when Blackness is centered? It's not about one or the other, but it's just to kind of like problematize a little bit the issues with representation when we have nations that would like to, kind of like resemble some sort of Europeanized sense of self.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
That is a very interesting question, and I can reply maybe from a practical perspective as an activist, how we face the situation and what we did to solve at least some of the problems. So one example is when the government has this very good perspective of having an ethnic public policy for education, the main set is like, okay, we are talking about people who speak indigenous languages. So for many years, the intercultural public policies of the Peruvian government was very focused on communities that speak a different language. That was the only intercultural approach. So since we speak Spanish and we don't speak indigenous language, we were always far from that. So we didn't want to say, hey, we are against that, but it's how we can be included. And the strategy that I like and that I always encourage is to explore is to understand the differences, for example, between race and ethnicity. So that was a key strategy that we had in Lundu, and we incorporate that in different states. For example, something that we did that impacted the whole country was to advocate for the inclusion of a variable about race and ethnicity in the intake forms of the hospitals. So right now, all the hospitals of Peru, they have a question about ethnicity where you can recognize if you are indigenous, you need to say if you are Quechua or if you are from the Amazon, because it's absolutely different the approach than a health provider should have when is dealing with a situation connected with an indigenous woman or with an Amazonian woman. But if you add race, you have the possibility to check both, no? My race is indigenous and my ethnicity is Quechua. In our case, we will just say my race is Afro-Peruvian, but we also provide options. We say we are Afro-descendants / Afro-Peruvian, Negro, Mulatto, Moreno, and we really, as an institution, we just use the word Afro-descendants, but we recognize that it's important to provide people all the identities that are related to their miscegenization, because this is a way how we won't debate with the community. We just provide tools so they will have more opportunities to recognize themselves. So this is why the word Sambo or moreno really express an identity that is more mixed. And we are comfortable using that specifically from a strategic perspective, no, for public policies, not necessarily for the public debate, but at least for the public policies. That is maybe an example.
Yeah.
Tania, would you like to add? Yes, yes.
Yeah, it was such a, I mean, in the last census was I think the first time that the option of choosing a self-identifying race and ethnicity was the first time that was an option. And if I'm not completely mistaken, but I remember that among family members, we were thinking, how do we identify it? We don't really have roots with our indigenous ancestors anymore. We don't speak the language, so we can't really identify. So we were grappling with this so that we could sort of answer that question correctly, because while these policies are significant to then redistribute resources at the national level, the question about what happens when we center one or the other, to me, it's hard to answer it in sort of an umbrella way, because I think it very much depends on what is happening. And I think what Mónica did about talking about particular institutions or government institutions in the medical sense field, that's a good way of seeing it and in grasping it, because these categories are very messy in the process of colonization that really created this categorize the other, and then forces us to continue creating these categories and identifications so that we can seek resources from the nation state. So to me, it's complicated to say exactly how this happens overall, but I know that in terms in the arts, for instance, which is something that perhaps I can talk about in Peru, it has, I think, the experience that perhaps from the outside, and we might see Peru as a country that identifies more with indigenous identities in connection to a national identity, when really the lived experience in the country is very different. I think that there is, and we can see it expressed in how politics are playing out right now, there is an alignment with actually diffusing the indigeneity or and trying to create this sort of mestizo or mestizaje idea, which I mean, it's also a strategy to create assimilation. Anyways, I'm not going to get into the whole mestizaje, but there was a whole history in Peru to try to create this discourse that we are all mixed, that we are all a little bit of something, that because there is this tendency to align towards whiteness. And that has been very detrimental for artists and communities who are not willing to do that, who don't want to do that, because that is the norm. And so more recently, what I've seen is that in the same way that perhaps happened in the US, that artists and communities that identify with the racial identity are able to carve way in a very hostile environment in the art world in Peru. And there's making room from these, legacy or big organizations that control all the resources to then make room for this particular ethnicity or race. And that is a way of that it's to rationalize how they redistribute resources. But I do feel like there's always going to be some loss in identifying racial or ethnically, because all of those categories are very much rooted in a history that is fraught with racism. And so even how that in itself is a strategy for recognition, but it also needs to happen while centering that this is a valid strategy, because we are coming from a history of extreme racism in a country that tends to align with whiteness and rejects other bodies that are racialized or ethnicized in ways that are not white. Hope that answers.
Yes,
I
definitely.
don't. Yeah. Okay.
And yeah, and thank you for mentioning that thing about this utopia of racial mixture, which is extremely ingrained in different contexts in Latin America. We have the post-racial, right, utopia, kind of like spearheaded by Martí's intellectual contributions in Cuba, but we also have this democracia racial in Brazil, which in the end, right, ends up hurting more than it actually helps this redistribution of resources and recognition. So now, Yuri, thank you for your patience waiting for, with this debate.
I'm learning a lot.
Yes. And Judy, I want to know, you have been commissioned to compose pieces for the June 9th event of the Multicultural Music Encounters of our organization, and knowing and studying and from lived experience, all of this history and stories. What has been that source of inspiration that you have used to produce an original, contribution for our encounters?
It's great. Thanks for the question, because listening to the conversation and all the information you have, the music sounds like the soundtrack of the conversation a little bit, because working with the orchestra, we have to say something very important. As you mentioned before, Peru is a country next to the Pacific Ocean and the Andes. These mountains and this culture that happened there, the Incas Empire before, and all that legacy that we have. So the blackness in Peru is pretty different than the blackness in the Caribbean blackness or the Brazilian blackness or North American blackness. The blackness in Peru is black plus yellow plus red plus a little bit of more elements that have a very distinctive taste. That's why I think Afro-Peruvian music has something different and make it sound so special, because the mixification in music is a result of the people. So even when we say that what color Peruvians, what color is the skin of the Peruvians? We don't know. We had a Japanese president. What I can say? It's a mixture of a lot of stuff, a lot of things. And I compose the music, just setting the music a little bit of a rhythmic, very kind of constant Afro rhythm at the beginning, with in a odd meter, like a 5/4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, but very percussive. But suddenly, I start to set in put the music in the map with very sounds from the Andes. I realized this because at the end, the Afro-Peruvian music is, we can say it's exactly African, because it's not, but it's not exactly Andean. Of course, it's not. It's a mixture of those elements. And when we go deep in music, we're going to find this a little bit of this. It's like when you prepare a very complex dish for any kind of food, maybe, I don't know, and you can feel like it tastes like meat, or this is because soy sauce is from Asia, and this potato is from the land, and this meat is from, and the onion is, you have something like we say the plomo saltado, a very popular dish with these elements. And also we can dig into the cuisine, because it's the other part, and we can find all these elements, not only the music. And for me personally, is a great challenge, and also the great satisfaction, because as a composer, you're waiting all the time any commission or have the chance to write music for the seriously, not for the real thing, and to have the chance to use the orchestra with the elements they have, the regular, we are talking about Peruvian setting of music with the traditional guitar or the percussion, is with standard maybe European orchestra, and we have to put there percussion, dates. It's fun, but at the same time is how you have the aesthetic, because you have to replace the timbres, And working with this, of the course that we have, as my experience as Afro-Peruvian, because Afro-Peruvian represent for me all these legacies together. For one side, for this kind of blackness of my mother's family, and the other side, my mixed indigenous and white from my father's side, because they're like this situation that we many of the Peruvians, many of the Afro descendants are basically 50% or 60% or 45%. I think now in the way that the people is enjoying the music, I think we can find, thanks to the Afro-Peruvian music, it's a point of connection, and we can talk and we can share things, because the politics is surrounded by interest. But I think the real thing, when we share music or culture or cuisine or sports, whatever, we can find points of connection, and we have to take advantage of that. But basically, this inspiration for me is put a little bit of the Andes, the sound of the Andes, with the sound of traditional and percussive Africa, and also going to this sound travel. As a composer, when you write something, like a writer, for example, you don't know the end of your novel. You're writing, you're developing. Just suddenly, the characters of your novel start to telling you what is going to happen, not you. You are just like a source of compose. In the same way, when I start with a couple of sounds, a couple of bars, that bar is telling me what's going to happen next. At the beginning, I have an idea to put this there, but then the music itself is telling me, no, don't do that, because it's good. You're going to create a Frankenstein. If you want to create something very organic, it's go with me. This is a way. It's like I discovered when I talked years ago with one of my mentors, Gil Goldstein. He told me, if you are discovering that, you're in the good path, because it's the path of the composer. It's just go with the piece, because when you create something, like a sound, like a very disorganized world that we have, suddenly the sound is vibration, and this vibration is something is alive, and the vibration is giving you the cue for the next and the next and the next. And when you decide to compose something for 6-7 minutes, you at the end is 20, 25. And when you want to create something very long, 3 minutes is enough, because the music itself is telling you what's going to happen. So my idea was mix this part of the land, just to give the opportunity to the people that's listening, or the audience listening to the music, sit in the concert and can feel the Andes, and then can feel the percussion. I can feel all these rhythms of Peru, and to make this music pretty unique and very interesting for me. Like in this case, representing my culture and my music here in New York. I'm so happy for that.
Thank you very much for that. And if you all, the attendees, want to see this, in action and happening, remember that Yuri's pieces will be performed in June, on June 9th specifically. And we're going to be seeing that, like really in action, and kind of like, it's interesting how this conversation that we're having is going to illustrate, and add strength to the pieces that you composed and are going to be performing on June 9th. Now, to kind of like really bring it to the present times, Mónica, what movements, and you as one of the major activists of Afro-Peru, what movements have come out of the region, of the fight for recognition, not only to be recognized and represented in society, but also in different cultural organizations?
When you say what movement, are you asking about the name of organization?
The name of organizations like Lundu that you spearheaded and so on. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Yes, it's so interesting, because especially in the last, let's see, 5 years, because the accessibility to internet, we really see in Peru a lot of activists that they are like trying to create new paradigms, new aesthetics, and connecting that proposal to sometimes could be a web page or social network, or but something that I really like to address is not enough to be outspoken in Instagram for being an activist. No, so we now see, not just in Peru, in many countries in Latin America, a lot of nice things that are very important, very meaningful, because they are creating new paradigms. They are giving information to people, to kids, to teenagers that maybe before they had no idea that someone like that exists in Panama or in Colombia. So I think that is important itself. But it's important to address that it doesn't mean that with this action we are necessarily transforming a concrete reality of people, especially people that has less privilege to spend a lot of time in internet, or people that are more in a rural community with no internet. So I know that you asked me for specific names, but I think this topic is very, very important right now, because I know that after this conference or lecture, many people will go to internet and find things about Afro-Latinos, but we need to try to identify groups that are really reaching the daily life of people. So I can, for example, mention in the case of Peru, there is a group, Ashanti, that is a group of young people that they are doing a lot of training in public policy, but also in social entrepreneur ideas, no? Which is very important, because I think that besides talking about identities, we need to cross that level. And okay, now I know that I am Black, but how I am going to improve my income, how I will have a better house, no? We need to move from the identity discourse to something that could be more related to have a better quality of life of humans, not always talking about racial discrimination, because that is the second idea that I would like to address. The main problem is, like, we, as an organization, we were very focused in the fight against racism, because the racism in Peru is very, very strong and hard. But sometimes we felt that we didn't have enough time to celebrate life. So now our idea, for example, just today, the group in Peru, because I am now in New York, they did today and yesterday 2 workshops in a rural community of El Guayabo, in coordination with a group of dancers of El Guayabo. They are going to do something soon in coordination with the Ministry of Justice, with girls and teenagers of a cárcel de menores. I don't know how I say that, cárcel de menores. Yeah. Gears, yes. So
like
in the case
juvenile
of
correction. Yeah.
juvenile, yeah, just talking about racial discrimination, about gender, about identity. We also have an extraordinary organization, which is the Afro-Peruvian Museum of Tania, located in a rural community in the north of Peru. And they are luthiers, and Yuri knows that, no? Because they are building or rebuilding all instruments that they were recorded back then. There are some old documents that reflected that in the Afro-Peru, in the north of Peru, there were marimba and other instruments that they were extinct due to the climate change as well, because we don't have any more the trees or the raw material to build that. So the Museum of Tania review a codice and identify the instruments, and they are inviting musicians from Lima and from different regions to the community to build the instruments again. And after they teach how to play the instruments, and they create a very alive network of communities and musicians around that programs. I think I really recommend you guys to check more about the Afro-Peruvian Museum of Tania.
Thank you very much. And it's very important that you're mentioning the thing that, yes, we have to be vocal about racial discrimination, but also celebrate life. And it reminds me of Festejo, which Yuri knows very, very well. And that Yuri introduced for us at one of the events that we held this year. So, and I'm sure, Yuri, right, you can confirm that there's going to be some festejo as part of your compositions.
Yes, festejo is a very traditional movement. Basically, I think it's more uplifting, more popular. When we talk about Afro-Peruvian music, is immediately festejo, no? And then the other ones. So festejo means celebration. And as you mentioned, I think we talked about this before. So for me, festejo is an answer to the suffering and the struggling of these people with no space for hope in general, because the kind of life you are living suffering, struggling every single day, I think they have to create something, to make something in order to survive. So any difficulties, any stress situation, always creativity always awakes, no? And something has to happen to try to something like kind of a medicine effect or to help this suffering. So that's why when you listen to Festejo, you're feeling something special in the part of rhythm and also make you happy. So ticket. What is that? Even your body can't, because it's responsible. Maybe it's crazy because it's something like humans have the ability to respond, to adapt to any different situations, even in situations like this, like struggling the slave ship. Instead, like complain or say I'm suffering, poor of me, they decided, no, let's go to keep alive, let's go to survive, and let's make people happy. Let's be together in a community, keep these traditions happy, even after the slave ship. And in the situations that the Black population were living, and in the side of the society, no education, no health. We know that story. Even we know about the Peruvian music from the 50s, not before. Nobody cares. Nobody knows exactly what happened with the Afro-Peruvian music at the beginning of the 20th century, because wasn't music like nobody considered music to put in a record, except from the 50s when people like Los Hermanos Santa Cruz, or Pancho Fierro, or even in the 60s, Peru Negro, they start to make records. So we have to remember that I think in 1977 or 76 was the first time the official criollo in a record label was the first time you can find a track with a festejo. Was a Pepe Villalobos composer. He insists to put a festejo in an official record of criollo music. This is what we have to say. The criollo music is the music, the traditional music from the coast of Peru, basically with rhythms like the waltz, which is coming from Europe, but there was a transformation of the waltz in the Peruvian. Of course, Black population have a lot to do with that because they was part of this creation of this style, on this special taste. But the Afro-Peruvian music itself was like, it's like the ugly dog here, until that record. And after that record, when they accept, this recommendation, the album was a boom. And with the Afro-Peruvian music start to rise thanks to the young people, because they recognize, they can connect with the joy, the youth, and start to dance. And during the 80s, basically, we can say that the music in the coast is surviving because the Afro-Peruvian music now, because it represents the modernity of music, because was on those stuff, it represents in some way the tradition. But I think we can say that Black Peruvian music is alive because people is still creating in these rhythms, and everyone is interested in that. I think that's the interesting part. But we don't have more registered before the 50s. We have to look for you have to look for the older ones to tell you the stories, the way they dance, what is the songs, the lyrics, which sounds like a cloud, and you can go deep and they dig in there and look for more information. But thanks to the other people is working in music and researching, we have an Afro-Peruvian music in a very good health right now.
That's great. Tania, did you want to say something? I'm sorry if I interrupted you before.
No, I really appreciated Monica's reminding us that a lot of these positions that people are pushing back and making room to have a better quality of life and enjoy life fully come from an intersect. But in sociological theory, we use the word intersectional, which is this concept by Kimberly Crenshaw. To understand that to really tackle these forms of inequality, we need to understand them at how multiple ways of exclusion connect to each other. So race, class background, gender, sexual orientation, and really seeing how then the multiple ways in which artists are strategizing by looking at their identities intersectionally and building solidarity across racial or ethnic lines. I think that's also really important, or at least in the last few years, I've seen in Peru artists working across some of these categories because of other forms of exclusion and understanding them intersectionally. And what the other thing that reminds me of that is that there's some artists expanding the way even that we might think about Afro-Peruvian music and bringing in, for instance, a queer approach. For instance, Les Cotités are queer musicians and thinking intersectionally about how these different forms of exclusion can be pushed with joy, with music, with celebration. So I wanted to just like echo what Mónica was saying too, about thinking in multiple ways.
Thank you. And now to completely wrap it up, we already kind of started answering that question, all of us, but pretty much this question kind of like applies to all your contributions throughout the conversation, and that would be what can be done, and I'm thinking about this in terms of education. We have students here from different universities in New York that are part of this research focus group. What can everybody continue to do on different fronts to advance the conversation around Blackness and Afro-descendants in Latin America, and specifically in the Peruvian context? And anybody can answer this question, or we can have a little round with all of us.
I can share something, and just to address that, in the case of Lundu, we started as a band of poetry and music, and we were raising money to do the political work. And this is why it's important to understand, at least for us, or for the part of the family where I am coming from, dancing, like reciting, performing is a consubstantial part of our life. There is no division. No, we don't stop to dance and after to recite poetry. All is together, and that is important as a reply to your question, is to understand our culture as a whole, not necessarily applying these more Western categories where if you are like dancing, it's not really connected with music or it's not connected with other ways of performing. And I think one key advice or comment could be try to support programs that give the cultural producers power to lead their own initiatives. No, that is very important, to have power in the cultural industry, no, because we know what happened with that. And the other is support sustainably tourism or touristic initiatives, because right now, one of the key issues in the agenda of Black people in Peru and in Latin America is related to the land, to stay in our land. So it's very important to see that, because back then nobody liked to live where we live, but now everybody wants our land. Even in Chincha, no, where my family is from, it's like, okay, what's happening? It's the same pattern of now, because the natural resources are located in our land, even in the desert or in the Amazon. It's important to remember that. And maybe the last thing is avoid to export concepts that are just connected to the context of the US. We always need to reflect and trying to be more sophisticated. Okay, maybe this concept is okay for the US, but what happened with Latin America is a different context, it's a different culture. So just spend a little bit of time to understanding and reflecting more before we will apply a concept or a category to analyze a whole region, no?
Yeah, I would say don't stay in the complicated and in the complex. Not try. I think staying away from oversimplifying a culture and identity. There's always complexities. There's always multi-layers, and so not trying to put things into categories or boxes, but embrace that complexity. Sometimes things won't be fully graspable if you don't belong to that particular group, and that should be in a way the way it is. There's complexity that is not even legible as audience members, or and that's in being comfortable in that complexity, not feeling like we need to understand things and categorize them or make full sense of them. Some things are gonna escape our understanding, and being comfortable with that. I think it's one of, I feel sometimes just not fully being able to explain something. It's okay being comfortable with that. Even in the case of like cultures like Afro-Peruvian culture that you might start understanding, but some things might not be fully legible, but you still can appreciate that complexity by holding it and making space for it. And then the other thing that I believe it's important is to always acknowledge where's my lens coming from? How am I interpreting this work of art? What is my personal history that is filtering the way that I'm reading and interpreting this work? Where are my biases? Questioning those biases and confronting them so that you start shedding them and unlearning them too. But that's asking, how am I arriving to this work? How am I arriving to this culture?
Yeah, positionality at its best. Yeah. Anything else, Yuri?
Nothing, just they was excellent, but they both were brilliant. I can add something because it's very important that the point of view of the situation that happened in Latin America with the Afro-Peruvian culture is totally different than it happened in because this coming from different history backgrounds. The Spanish crown was different. The treatment with the Portuguese, or the British crown has a different tradition, different forms. I have to recommend just listen to music, the good Afro-Peruvian music. I strongly recommend look for all the works by Nicomede Santa Cruz and Victoria Santa Cruz, because they're responsible of the rebirth of the Afro-Peruvian music. They just was like Afro-Peruvian music was like deconstructed and rebuilt it again during the 60s and the 50s. In the way what we know the music in this moment, and in the 70s and the 80s, there happened more transformations that made possible that the music we are listening now. So just congratulations to these great women talking about this. Great, thank you.
Thank you so much. And with that, we're done with this panel. We could be talking about this for longer, but yeah, let's keep our students wanting more and wanting to explore more and continue to do the work and do the research. The product of this conversation will be used to produce a mini documentary that will be shown at the Multicultural Music Encounter concert on June 9th at the Lovinger Theater at Lehman College. You will be hearing from us with all the information and invitations to attend. And we hope to see you there. And we thank you wholeheartedly for supporting the Multicultural Music Group. And we thank Mónica, Tania, and Yuri for their time, their work, and yeah, their commitment to continuing to contribute to these conversations. So thank you, everybody. And I hope you have a great afternoon.
Thank you.
Bye.
Ciao.
Bueno.